My name is Pavel. I worked in the Metis ecosystem for 3 years. I worked in business development as the integrations lead, and then moved on to be developer relations lead for ZKM. A lot of my experience has been practical, taking what aspects and designs and research of the blockchain space and trying to find use cases and business use cases that essentially can be applied practically. So with that mindset, I want to present ZKM. But before I present ZKM, I want to define settlement. So settlement is the state of finalizing a transaction where the transaction is not able to be reverted. So we take a look at Kraken. Kraken has a list of different finalization parameters. Over here, I don't know if it's a little bit small, but we have Ethereum proof of work, and then we have Ethereum network, and the different networks and the different estimated time for gaining the essentially the assets that you deposit into the Kraken smart contract. You will only get that after a certain period. And as we see with Ethereum proof of work, the most recent fork of Ethereum when Ethereum migrated to proof of stake, that it takes roughly 3 to 4 days for finalization to occur. Versus Ethereum network now, it takes roughly around 14 minutes. So there's these big gaps between these different types of networks. So, and then in this case, this is to prevent things like a double spend or essentially the potential reversal of a transaction. So the idea of universal settlement is where any computation can be executed by one blockchain, and the results of that execution can be resolved to any other blockchain. So the idea of the entangled rollup is a way to trustlessly pass messages from one chain to a different one. So this is the overall diagram of the entangled rollup, but the main and core idea that I want to emphasize is the idea of the universal settlement network, where we can connect the different types of networks that are present and essentially connect them as adapters to different types of potentially incompatible VMs. So we have different types of VMs. You know, Ethereum is EVM. We also have movements. We have Solana. We have other different VMs. But the idea is that a universal L2 can essentially plug in and act as a means to transfer different types of assets in a unified way. And so there's a very quick scenario, but I'll basically run through a lot of these slides as we go. But the idea is Alice wants to transfer 100 USDT to Bob from Ethereum to Avalanche. And she wants these 3 characteristics of her bridge. She wants it trustless, extensible, and liquidity optimized. And this is the third part is the idea of this the idea of entangled rollup for liquidity optimization. So I'm just going to skip some of the this overall ideas, but the ideas behind bridges is we have externally verified bridges, which essentially depend on an external set of verifiers. And what this means is that it's achieved consensus through those verifiers and not by the security of the base chain that they are deriving, that they're actually sending assets to. So I'm dependent on a variety of different validators, but not on the main chain that I'm actually interacting. So I'm not inheriting the security of the main chain whenever I use externally verified bridges. So externally verified bridges have high security assumptions. The idea of layer 2s, the idea of natively verified bridges. So we have different types of natively verified bridges where the different types of, where the layer 2s are essentially taking the security of Ethereum or the security of the base chain and their validator set and using it, using the layer 2s as a form of an execution client. And then the base chain is used as a consensus to achieve consensus and settlements over the transactions. So the idea is there is a native bridge where there's a native mint function that occurs. And they're essentially minted and burned on the L2, and tokens are unlocked and locked on the L1. So what if we can combine both the externally verified, or like the idea of the externally verified where it's super extensible, but also natively verified where we have the security of the base chain. So the concept of ZK bridges, we take a batch of transactions, execute them off-chain, then post a proof of that execution on layer 1, and essentially proving that the execution did in fact happen and it was correct. So then we have the entangled rollup overview. So the whole idea of the entangled rollup is to use layer 2 as an adapter. And ZK proofs are a method of communicating between these different types of adapters. And so for liquidity optimization, the idea behind this network is that anytime anyone deposits into any L2 that's connected via this liquidity network or the universal L2, is that all of the network would increase in their liquidity. And what does that mean? So if I deposit millions of dollars into the universal L2 on Ethereum, so the unified native liquidity of the entire ecosystem of different universal L2s also increases because I'm able to transfer that liquidity from different chains very easily within this type of structure. So essentially, anytime that I add liquidity to one of these universal L2s, I can come in and use it across all of these universal L2s. So the overall idea is taking a deposit to Ethereum to the universal L2. Then we can, how we actually transfer the liquidity is we can burn that corresponding amount of asset on that layer 2 to the burn address. It can be a public burn address, but also a private burn address, introducing a form of privacy as well to send it across different types of these universal L2s, and that's a different type of extension. But this is just for liquidity optimization, so I'll just talk about that. The burn of that gets sent to the burn address. I generate a ZK proof that the tokens were in fact burned, and as a result, I can take that proof and leverage the native mint function of that L2 as a means to mint a corresponding amount of USDT or any other type of asset that's natively available by that L2. And then again, this is native USDT because we're leveraging the mint function of that L2 that's connected via this universal L2 system. So essentially, we're able to take the assets that we have, and we're able to, in no way we duplicate this, but we're able to essentially show that we burned these assets on one layer 2 and are able to mint those corresponding amount of native assets using the native L2 mint function. And these are one-to-one with each other. I don't need to have a wrapped version where I need to then swap it to the native version. This is native USDT. This is what the whole concept is. And so simplifying that user experience. And the idea is we can also take not just 100 USDT because it might be a very small amount. Maybe this is better for like intents, for having these small amounts. But we're talking about maybe multiple millions of dollars that we can actually pass through these different types of layer 2s that would then be able to essentially transfer millions of dollars without requiring a counterparty to facilitate that transfer. So I don't need to rely on a liquidity provider in order to provide that liquidity. I can essentially transfer it across different L2s. And where we're seeing with app chains is that one of the leading problems is fragmentation. We can't use assets from one layer 2 to a different layer 2 without requiring these different types of connectors. So the idea is, why don't we just create a system where we can facilitate large amounts of transfers using both the ZK proofs as well as leveraging the native mint function on these layer 2s. So the idea is that it's trustless, where we don't depend on third-party validation, because we are still interacting with the base layer 2. It's also interoperable. This system can work with EVM and potentially non-EVM solutions. Depending on the structure, these universal L2s can be all EVM compatible, and as a result, this system can all be a unified system. But also, within a ZK VM, you can also prove interactions happen without the layer 2 needing to be fully EVM as well. So they can also be different VMs on that layer 2. So the idea is that I can still use this type of system even if my layer 2 is a different VM. Then the third point, it's liquidity optimized. The idea is that any bridged funds that enter the network can be used across all the networks that are produced. And finally, we see layer 2 scalability benefits. People, right now, there's billions of dollars locked in layer 2s. And as a result, people want to go to layer 2s because they provide a cheaper and more scalable way to interact. And so where we're seeing more and more layer 2s being adopted, that leads to more and more fragmentation. And so people want to stay on layer 2s, but people also want to interact with different networks of different layer 2s as well. So we want to essentially facilitate this across different networks, across different blockchains as well, using layer 2s as an adapter. So there are two major cons. One is that we need the support of the native mint function of the bridge. So of the layer 2. So existing layer 2s potentially, based on this technology is still very new, very research driven. In order for this to be adopted, likely there would need to be some battle tested and secured way to basically guarantee that an arbitrary amount of funds can't be minted. Right now, the only way to mint assets on a native layer 2 is if you deposit those assets on a layer 1, which then is able to be minted on that layer 2. In this case, we're extending the mint function to also accept ZK proofs, which then allows the minting of any arbitrary amount, which is definitely a big risk factor. We also see that within this structure, if I deposit, let's say, $100 million on Ethereum, and then transfer to the universal L2 on Ethereum, and then transfer it to Solana, well, let's say Solana doesn't have $100 million of liquidity directly on the L1, I'm not able to withdraw it on Solana. But that doesn't mean that the money's gone. That means I can actually transfer it back to the universal L2 on Ethereum and still redeem it. The idea is that we can still redeem. The assets are still backed one-to-one with those same assets. They're just on different networks. So if we think of blockchains as just a type of consensus, all we're doing is we are leveraging the consensus verification of the base L1 with the ability to transfer to different networks, even if, and still use that liquidity, even if on that base L1 there isn't that liquidity backing. But within the universal L2 ecosystem, there still is that liquidity. It just might not be on the chain or on the L2, or sorry, on the L1 that you are on the L2 for. You could still withdraw on Ethereum. So that's the main idea, and definitely always looking for feedback related to this. And I think I'm on time, but we're dealing with different research problems or research areas. So including decentralized relays where I want to post transactions reliably without potentially needing an intermediary or third party. How do I do this with redundancy? There's also VM interoperability. How do I exactly move assets from EVM to non-EVM chains in a secured fashion? So, and then the finality parameters. How do I make sure and guarantee that I can include many different L1s within this system, but still retain the full security advantages of these consensus models? So is there a way that we can do dynamic consensus based on the L1 that gets added into the universal L2 structure? Is there maybe an Aave type mechanism where chains essentially need to be added on in order to be used? How we see, or at least how I see this model being adapted, is very similar to Aave, where you have a basket of different assets, and then those assets can be used to loan out against other assets. We can see the same thing of chains being added into this system, where certain chains can have the ability to mint, while other chains might not be. So all of these are all considerations, all plans, research initiatives for the future. And definitely, if you're interested in exploring this area of research in terms of cross-chain interoperability and seeing the different ways that we can leverage the security of blockchains, but still be able to use them for different use cases, such as liquidity optimization, definitely would consider visiting the website and seeing ways we can facilitate contributions, I guess. And yeah, thank you.